Hey guys, it's Kat, and I have a ZBrush tutorial for you today in how to make a basket setting. Now, this is just a hypothetical example. It's probably not anything I'd ever make or even execute, but you can see here I have a stylized basket setting, and this is not real hard to do within ZBrush. You do need to be using the ZBrush full version, not Core, because we're going to use the ZModeler tools to create this. I'll show you what a basic one looks like. For example, here is one that's just a very simple basket setting, and that is pretty easy to do. Let's see. Oh, I have one here that I fattened up a little bit. Imagine when it's really, really small, though, you need to pay attention to maybe the thickness of those wires. And so one of the nice things about ZBrush is I can fatten this up pretty easily and then take a measurement. So I can get these close when I'm printing them on a Formlabs printer. And in some cases, I can set stones with very minimal cleanup. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. I'll start out by creating a new document and not saving changes. And I'll start with the simple brush. So over on the right-hand side, choose the simple brush, then tap on Tool. And we're looking for the Cylinder 3D. And if you've been using it, you might see other versions. Like I've got Cylinder 3D, but an _3. This is one that I've already been working with. Go for the original, which is just Cylinder 3D. Very basic. Now click and drag somewhere in the middle of your stage or your canvas and immediately press the T key. That gets you into the editing mode. Now other things that are important though are looking at the mesh that's underlying. So on this vertical row over here, we're looking for something that when you hover over it says Draw Polyframe. It's a Shift F. When you tap on that, you can see the underlying grid. I have this also set as a MAH shiny. So this is the shiny material. The default here is going to be something like a gray, a matte cap gray, or a white. So any of those will work just fine. I'm going to put it back here on my shiny silver because I just like to design with that. To get this started, we need to go to the bottom of our tools over here and look for Initialize. Initialize is going to allow us to manipulate this grid. And I need to first change the H divide. The H divide needs to be a resolution that will allow you to divide it by the number of prongs that you have. So say, for example, if I'm working with 4 prongs, then that number needs to be divisible evenly by 4. And in this case, 32 is just fine. If you are working with 6 prongs, you might need to make this 36. And you can manipulate it a little bit more. Sometimes I'll make wider prongs. I might use actually two of the grid instead of 1. But for right now, let's just stick with 32. The second thing I want to do is play around with this inner radius. So let's click and drag this until you see basically a hole in the middle. I'll set this somewhere probably around 75 on this grid, and that's fine. Just something approximately in that range for right now. We can adjust that later. The next thing we need to do is use V-divide and make this fewer items. So drag this to the left until you see that you have 3 polygons from top to bottom. What's nice about doing it this way is that on the inside here, you'll have corresponding polygons. So when we punch through this side, it will also have a place to punch through on the back. So that's why I do it this way. And one last thing is to use the Z size. We can use this to shrink down our piece to about maybe 50%. So just drag that somewhere around 50. Doesn't have to be exact, but there it is. It's about half the original size. Now we're ready to start working with it. Now, before you can do anything in ZBrush to this particular piece, we need to go up to the top and use Make Polymesh 3D to make this editable. As soon as I click this button, you'll notice it changed colors though, and that indicates that this is all now part of a poly group. We won't really use poly groups a lot in this project, but as we start pushing and pulling things, you'll notice that they'll turn different colors. So we don't really need to see the colors. If you want, wherever you turned on this poly frame, there's 2 words at the top, line and fill. You can actually click on fill and it will turn the color off. If you accidentally click line, you don't see those lines. So you can toggle those on and off, but for right now, we don't need the color, so you could just turn that off. Now the next step is to go to the Transform menu and choose Activate Symmetry. This is going to be on the Y-axis, so click Y, turn off Symmetry about the X-axis, turn on Radial Symmetry by clicking on the R, and then type the number of prongs in this field right here. So the radial count will be the number of prongs, and hit Enter. Now we need to change to our ZModeler brush. So click over here on our brush and look for ZModeler. Sometimes it's kind of hard to find, so if you get into this brush area, you can just type ZM as in Mike, and that will switch you over to ZModeler. It'll also take up some space up here, and it's showing a polysphere up here. But to be quite honest, I haven't figured out how to turn that off yet. That's a newer feature of 4R8. So now as you hover over different areas of your piece, you'll see that it will either highlight a polygon. In fact, you can see it says here QMesh Polyloop. Yours probably won't say this. If you hover over a line, it's talking about an edge loop. And there's also points. So as you're working with ZModeler, there's surfaces. So basically your polygon, points, and lines. Hover over one of the polygons though and press the space bar. I need to make sure that this says Polygon Actions. We've chosen QMesh and a single poly. Once you have all three of those now, if you go out and click and drag this little polygon out, you want to make that sort of squarish. So it'll be approximately a square on the top. Not exact. It's skewed a little bit, but that'll work just fine. Now this is where our prongs are going to be, and we want them on the outside of the basket. So the next step is to come down to the bottom here, click and drag, but drag this all the way down. If you can't get it all the way down, see if we can continue. We can't, so just undo. So click here again and drag until it's all the way flat at the bottom. And then the next one you can just tap and it'll bring it all the way down. So that looks pretty good. Now to bring these prongs up from this side piece, all you have to do is click on the top and drag this up. And that will give us the prongs. And we're just chugging right along. Now we want to open up this basket and start putting little windows through that are going to let light in for our stone. So if you hover over the polygon, again, it's not the line, it's not the point, it's just the polygon. We're going to push that all the way through until it punches through. You can see it on the other side. Now you can just tap and tap. And then, well, I'm going to skip one and tap and tap and tap over here. You can see here I actually left another piece there. And that was just to show you. So if I tap again, it goes away. So that's probably more of a traditional fabricated basket. Now there's another piece right here that I want to get rid of. So all I have to do is tap that and it goes away as well. So now that pretty much is our basket. But baskets are generally more tapered. So, this could be a really interesting stylized piece. You could even come through and add decoration to it. So for example, I could pull this out a little bit and then tap and tap. Oops, wrong one. And so if I wanted to make that sort of bumpy on the outside, you can do all sorts of things with it, but I'm going to go for a traditional setting, so I'll undo. There's one more thing I will do real fast. As you're rotating in ZBrush, as you press the Shift key, it will lock on a side view. And this is not looking directly on, so the prongs are on the sides. So I'm going to reorient this real fast. So again, I'm going to click and drag, but hold the Shift key to lock it in place. It'll be easier if I turn on the floor. Yours may already be on, but I'll go ahead and reinitiate, I guess, my floor there. It's on the Y-axis, which is this little Y up here. That will help me rotate this into position. Now I'll switch to the Move mode or press W. And I'm bringing up the Gizmo. The Gizmo is a new part of 4R8 and also in ZBrush Core, but this is nice and handy. If you're in the older version, you can turn the Gizmo off by pressing Y, and that'll get you back to your old tool that you're used to, so the transpose line. But I'll go back to this one right here. I'm grabbing onto this white ring, clicking, and I'll hold the shift key, but notice it's not lining up. It's not, I don't have the prongs exactly on either side. So I'll just have to eyeball that a little bit and make sure that it's somewhat lined up, and that looks pretty good. Oh, I could rotate it a little bit more. I'm on the side and I'm looking at this center prong. So what I'll do is I'll grab this green line and then rotate a little bit more. And now those two prongs line up perfectly, which means that these are also lined up as well. All right. Now the last thing to do here is I need to reorient my gizmo so things are easier. It's in the right place, but I'd like to orient it kind of along the X and Y and Z axes. Hold down the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key on a PC, and then click on this little circle right here, and that will reorient your gizmo. You can see it's now straight up and down, left and right. If I turn it over here, it's all situated like I want it. All right, so there's our basket setting. Now let's talk about tapering. I'd like to taper this piece, and in doing that, I'll need to switch over to a masking function. I'll also switch out of this. I'm just going to choose any brush, but get out of the ZModeler brush real fast. Now, if I hold down Command on a Mac or Control on a PC, I get my masking pen. So I can literally just click and drag and get a mask. However, if I undo, hold down the Command or Control, and then switch the alpha down here to alpha 27, which is a gradient, and yours is probably rotated. While I'm holding down Command or Control, go to the alpha menu, and I can rotate this piece or rotate this alpha until the white is at the top. Now, if I draw a box over this and make it pretty close to it, you'll see that it's now a darker mask, lighter, lighter, and very light. As I switch to the move mode and I have my gizmo, I can now grab this little red angle and see what happens, and that doesn't look good. Something's not quite right. So let me undo. Okay, something looks a little off, but let's go ahead and try. I'll hold down Command on this one, Command or Control on a PC. I'm drawing this box over it. Make sure you get the whole box and see if this will work. Oh, it's not. I rotated it. Okay, there we go. So now as I just use this little red rectangle, now you can see that I'm tapering this setting just a little bit, and you can go a little bit more if you'd like. All right. Now, if I'd like to adjust these prongs at the top, I can, but to do that better, I'm going to bring in a stone. So to clear the mask, I hold down Command on a Mac, Control on a PC, and just draw a box on the background. And here's my little basket setting. If I did want to go and mess around with the prongs, easiest way to do that would be hold down Command or Control, click on the alpha and turn the alpha off. Draw a box from the bottom that encompasses everything but the tops of these prongs, and then I can use the green arrow to move them down a bit, or the red one maybe to flare them out a tiny bit more, and that should be pretty good. I'll clear the mask by holding Command or Control and drawing a box on the background. All right, so that looks pretty decent. I don't need to adjust the spacing at all. If I wanted to adjust the thickness, there are some ways that I could come in and do that. Let's practice one, but you may not need it. I'll switch to the draw mode and again switch to the ZModeler brush, which is now up here at the top. As I hover over one of these polygons on the inside, I'll hold down the space bar, and this time I'm switching to polyloop. When I do that, as I hover over these polygons here, there's a yellow or orange line that appears. This one appears to the right, and there's one down. If I hover over the one to the right and click and drag towards the middle, you can see it's expanding that with another block. If you hold the Shift key, it eliminates that line, and I can make it thinner. So I may not necessarily want to do that. I don't want that too thin. So we'll leave it for now. I'll undo, but that's just the way that you could adjust it if you wanted to. right, but this one looks pretty good. Now, as far as sizing, you could resize these also. In this case, I would go in and probably resize the whole thing to maybe a size 6, or I'd bring in a stone. So let me add a stone to this one real quickly. So I go to my subtool palette and I'm appending, and I've already loaded a stone. So I just happen to have a stone handy. If not, I'll put a link, I guess, in the bottom to show you where to go get a stone. But in this case, I've already got one loaded. Imagine you do as well. I'll append. I'll go pick the stone. You can see it's a little bit large, so I'll choose it. And I'll need to turn this polyframe off. Okay. I'll rotate it, so I'll switch to the move mode. I've got my gizmo. I'll use my shift key to lock that at 90 degrees. And then I'll look at the size. So this particular piece here, let's see, if I go to geometry and size, it says it's about a size 3. When I'm relating this to my 3D printer, 3 is 3 millimeters. If I click there and type 6, this is a 6 millimeter stone. So I'm not up on my carat sizes, but anyway, 6 millimeters. I tend to go by millimeters. Then switch to the subtool palette again. Click on your basket setting. I can't see it. So let's go over to this vertical line here and select transparent. That will give it a ghosting effect with the stone. You can see that my basket is active. The stone is ghosted out, so it's not. But now I can increase the size of this basket and move it into the position that I might want it. So you can also see that the stone is interfering with the basket, so that might need to be a little bit less, I guess that collar we were just playing around with, that might need to be adjusted. Okay, so there it's not. If you're using a burr when you're setting it, of course, you may grind that out a little bit too. So you could do that. But let's just play like for right now that this is close enough. It's close enough for what we're doing. So now it's resized to the point where we can turn off the stone, and let's focus on smoothing this out. So we're going to use something called dynamic subdivisions. So go down to the geometry palette here and look for dynamic subdivisions right here. It's underneath the divide section. Now turn on dynamic. Okay, so you just toggle that button on, and you'll see it really kind of messes it up. It doesn't look great, but now I can go play around with flat subdivisions and smooth subdivisions and adjust that. So if I start out with smooth subdivisions and go to 3, you can see it keeps that kind of pointy shape there, but it's a little bit finer mesh. Now I'll move this up to 1, and you can see that it's keeping more of the shape that we had designed, but it's smoothing it out a bit. There's still a little bit of faceting, but we can fix that later. I also might want this area right here. I think that little window there might be too big, so I could also adjust the height on this, but we'll leave it for now. Anyway, so I can see that my subdivisions look pretty good. When I'm done, when everything's as I like it, we can then click Apply. And what that does is it then commits those subdivisions, I guess. It makes them something you can manipulate. So go up to the top under Geometry where it says Subdivisions, and it has a 5 in front of it. Well, it retained all this information of the lower resolution versions. As you go up like this, you can see that all of those different versions have been retained. I don't need all of those, so let's delete the lower levels. You have to have this scale all the way up to the right-hand side where it's in Subdivision 5, and then delete lower. So now this is something that we can start to smooth. Some of the things you can do, you can go in and use the polish function, or you could turn on Symmetry again, switch to a clay buildup tool, for example, get a nice big brush size, and just start smoothing. So you can do that with a brush and see how that's taking away some of this faceting. Or we can switch down to the deformation palette down here and look for polish. If you see polish, it has a little O right here. We want to toggle that and make that a white dot. And then you can click and drag this over several times just until it smooths it out nicely. And that's looking pretty good. So there's a basket setting. Now, one more thing. We don't know exactly how thick these little wires are in our basket setting. And you may have a size that you work with. I know a lot of the fabricated basket settings will actually use, I guess like maybe 18 gauge wire. So you can relate that to those sizes if you want. But there's a way that we can measure that. Remember, we resized this basket now to be appropriate for a 6mm size. It's kind of an actual size at this time. Now I'd like to cut these off and look at these prongs real fast. So I need to first turn off Symmetry. So you can either go to the transform menu or just press X and turn that off. We want to hold down Command and Shift and make sure that Select Rect is chosen. We're not clipping, which sometimes I'll use clipping, but we want the Select Rect, which is going to cut off the top of these prongs like that. You'll start off down here at the lower right, click and drag, so everything within the green box is kept. So there we go. However, I can't really see what's inside those prongs. I need to change the view. So scroll down to the bottom to Display Properties and look for the double button. When you click that, then you can see inside. It shows you the inner surface. Now I can switch to the Move mode, turn off the gizmo, and use this transpose line as a measuring tool. If I hover over this left edge, it's going to snap. So I click, hold my Shift key down, and wait for it to click on the other side. And now I can look up here and see that it's only 0.52 units, which is approximately 0.5 millimeter. So it just depends on the size that you want. But if you need that to be thicker, we can go over to the deformation palette and use Inflate. So I'll back out of this. I need to bring back these hidden parts. So I press Command and Shift or Control Shift, click on the background, and those parts come back. We had just hidden them. Now we go back to deformation. So I can see that this is approximately 0.5 millimeter. If I'd like, I can click this orange circle and drag this out. So let's say maybe I want that to be 0.75 approximately. I want that thickness to be 0.75. I can now use this transpose line as a measuring tool. So let's go over here and find Inflate. Drag Inflate over until this is thicker. Then to move my measuring line into place, the transpose line, you click the line itself, not the circles, and move it over. And see, I'm getting there, but let's inflate a little bit more. I can move this over and say, gosh, it's a little bit big now. So I'll just adjust the inflate again, and that's pretty close. Now it does look a little bit fat and chunky over here, but also remember that this is going to be very small. So a lot of times when you're designing in ZBrush, things look big and chunky until you actually move them down to where they're actual size and they look just fine. So don't be thrown off by that. All right, so that is our basket setting. And last but not least, since you're going to reuse this over and over so you don't have to make it each time, we'll go up to the tool palette, choose Save As, and then save this Z tool, and we'll just call it basket setting. I'll name mine 2. So there's your basket setting. It's ready to incorporate in other designs, and that's how it's done. Thanks for watching, and happy ZBrushing.